He loves it.
To order. Check and roll. Frank Riley present. Alan Zeman here today. Gary Foster present. Pat Nance.
Here.
James Nance. Aurora Farthing.
Here.
All right. So we have quorum to conduct business. And next item coming up is the approval of minutes from August 24th, 2017. Does anyone have any questions or comments or changes?
I move we accept the minutes.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second to accept the minutes. Do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. The ayes have it, it's unanimous. Minutes are adopted. Brings us to public comment under item D. Does anybody, I've got some comment cards here, but I think most of you are commenting on specific items when we get to them. But does anyone want to comment on something not on the agenda? Hearing none then. Moves us to item number E, staff reports and briefing from staff and discussion from the executive office and some personnel updates.
Yes, sir, Mr.
Please.
Chairman, and board members. I'm Nick Volinas, TDLR Chief of Staff. I'm joined here today with our Deputy Executive Director, Carla James, who you all have met. Also at the table, Christine Reif, who I don't believe you all have met yet, but she's our new she's your new point person here. Our staff are here on the advisory board staff, and we're glad to have her doing a great job. As well as we have Mary Winston, our attorney, and our general counsel, Brad Bowman. But I'm going to give you a little report on our executive office, kind of a summary of what's going on around the agency today. First off, we want to thank you for being here and thank you for your service to the state and to the folks in your industry. 2017 was a busy year for the agency, and it was a big year. As you know, it started off with the 85th session of the Texas legislature, and we had a summer session to follow. Since then, our staff's been busy implementing legislation that was passed during the last two sessions, and that process includes developing, reviewing rules, communicating to stakeholders, appointing and prepping advisory boards like yours, hiring additional staff, and dealing with education exams, IT programs, and more. Majority of the work has been completed, but this is a process that will continue through the next year as we implement more programs this year and next. Last fall, as you're all very aware of, our staff was busy doing what we could to help our licensees and small businesses along the Texas Gulf Coast recover from the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. Worked with the governor's office and Governor Abbott's Rebuild Texas program. And we're successful in implementing procedures to help our eligible licensees in the affected areas to help them recover and return to work as quickly as possible. Our Harvey focus now is on the rebuild by protecting small business and consumers to avoid unlicensed activity and ensuring that they receive quality work for their hard-earned dollars. Information on this and more can be found on our website, tdlr.texas.gov, as well as the governor's Rebuild Texas site. 2018 being a non-legislative year, it's when our agency takes on our statute-driven strategic planning exercise, and it's a way that we improve the way we regulate our programs. It's something we take seriously. 2 years ago, we identified 58 strategic initiatives to address during last year's legislative session. Proud to say that 56 of them passed and were signed into law. So we'll be going through that important process again this spring, the March, April time frame, and you'll be hearing more about that real soon. But I want to go back to our website for a minute, and it's something we refer to as our window to the world. It's our chief tool to communicate with our stakeholders and with the public. And wanted to share with you some recent web traffic numbers associated to this program. In the last 6 months, the the Weather Modification Program website had 6,149 page views, and that's an average of 30 a day. It does not include license searches. The vast majority of folks accessing your site are on the go as a bunch. 69% did so from a smartphone, 6% from a tablet, and that compares to only 25% from a regular desktop computer. The top reasons for visiting the site were meeting agendas, summary of rain enhancement operations in Texas, laws and rules, advisory committee information, and frequently asked questions. Also want to add that we are always looking at our sites to make them as fresh and innovative and user-friendly as possible. If you have any ideas, any thoughts, feedback, please pass them along to George or myself. Also want to promote our social media sites. We're on Facebook and Twitter to help you keep up with TDLR activities and news. We also have about 2,500 subscribers to your email blasts on topics ranging from education, exams, to forums, meetings, events, other notices. All this is to ensure transparency and openness for our stakeholders and the citizens of Texas. We thank you again for being here, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Buenas. Anybody have any questions?
Well, those are really interesting statistics. I had no idea we had that broad of a group that's following us around. I appreciate you sharing that with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brings us now to item E2, Office of Innovation. Mr. George Bowart, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. I'm George Bomar, Program Specialist in the Office of Innovation at TDLR. When the committee last met in the late summer of 2017, you made a recommendation that we renew the licenses of 7 applicants for fiscal year 18, and we did that before the start of the fiscal year, which was September 1 of 2017. And we currently have those 7 licensees holding permits for either rain enhancement or hail suppression activities. As a matter of fact, we have 10 permits that are currently active, and we have 3 of those permits that will be expiring soon, and renewal or new permits for those 2 projects are on the agenda today as action items. That's the status of licenses and permits that have been issued since the beginning of the fiscal year. We are currently in a drought in Texas. It's a typical La Nina winter, been quite dry. The Texas Panhandle particularly is bone dry. The Panhandle is setting a record for the longest string of rainless days. It is approaching 100. So a lot of areas of Texas are badly in need of moisture, only 5 months removed from a historic rain event that impacted the coastal plain and particularly the upper coast. But that's characteristic of our climate when we are in a La Nina scenario. We tend to go from one extreme to the other. Also want to mention that Austin was the site of a recent annual meeting of the American Meteorological Society, and a part of that convention held at the Austin Convention Center was the 21st Conference on Weather Modification. There were papers presented over the course of 3 days, most of them dealing with winter orographic cloud seeding for snowpack in the western United States. But also we heard from folks from many different countries who are now using cloud seeding technology with silver iodide, hygroscopic materials. We didn't have a lot of research reported on rain enhancement during the convective cloud season, which is, of course, our interest here in Texas. We don't have mountains, so we don't have any orographic wintertime cloud seeding activity that warranted. But as you'll hear later this morning, we'll have a report on the continuing research that the USDA and the Texas Weather Modification Association is sponsoring. That will come in an item further down on the agenda. And I also wanted just to cite several pieces of material that's been published recently. 3 articles, in fact. You have copies of those. One written by someone in England entitled "Cloud Seeding, Should We Be Playing God and Controlling the Weather?" It's interesting that in this article there is some history given to the development of cloud seeding technology by Vincent Schaefer during the 1940s. In that article, the statement is made, droughts are becoming more commonplace due to climate change. Almost half of the world's population will be at risk from high water stress by 2030. Countries are trying to mitigate some of this by inducing rainfall with a method called cloud seeding. And in fact, in 2016, there were 56 countries that were involved with cloud seeding operations. That's up from 42 just 5 years earlier. We're cited in the article from the analysis of our rain enhancement operations that have been going on in West and South Texas now for 2 decades. The fact that seeded storms last 20 minutes longer on average than untreated ones, and rain from seeded storms was almost 1.5 times that of storms nearby that were not treated. And there is mention made of the extensive use of cloud seeding now going on in the Middle East, particularly by the United Arab Emirates. And part of that UAE program is now supporting the use of drones to alter the electrical properties of clouds to induce electrical seeding. So it's a reflection of the fact that research in weather modification is now not just focused on providing ice nuclei to aggregate cloud water into rainwater to be released as rainfall, but it also illustrates the fact that there is now a new direction in research making use of the electrical properties of clouds. And again, our USDA folks will talk about that a little bit later. The second article is entitled "The Chemist Who Thought That He Could Harness Hurricanes." It's a really good history of how the early cloud seeding concept was used to try to alter the behavior of hurricanes. Research done as early as 1947 with mixed results, but it did lead to a very prominent weather modification research effort called Project Storm Fury during the 1960s. A number of hurricanes were seeded in the open Atlantic to see what effect, if any, seeding intensively the eye wall of hurricanes might be able to redistribute their energy, weaken them, caused them to rain out more over open water rather than hit the U.S. coastline as a Category 3 or Category 4 storm. And there's also some history in that article about the use of cloud seeding during the Vietnam War to muddy the Ho Chi Minh Trail and impede the enemy. Interesting reading that reflects the fact that researchers are delving into declassified material these days and discovering that cloud seeding was in greater use in earlier decades than we ever thought. I did want to just read this quotation from the gentleman, Mr. Keene, who wrote the article, the second article that I'm referring to. He says, "For me, the most profound truth to emerge from several decades of weather control research came from a lowly Storm Fury pilot." Storm Fury, again, was the hurricane mitigation project. Quote, "It was disappointing to conclude we really couldn't do it," that is, affect the behavior of a hurricane. He would say years later, "But the storms were so big and we were so small." And the third interesting article published recently in Physics Today is entitled "Lightning Traces Busy Shipping Lanes." It's being learned now that emissions from ships are seeding clouds out over the open water. And these are visible on satellite imagery as ship tracks. Those tracks tend to generate lightning twice as often as adjacent areas where ships do not travel. And there are some deductions being made now about the role of this inadvertent weather modification. The shipping lanes present a rare opportunity to observe in isolation the consequences of human-made aerosols to weather and climate. So again, just another illustration of how we are impacting our climate and often don't realize it, whether it be on a large scale or a small scale. Be happy to answer any questions, or try to, that you might have about any of these articles.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Bomar?
No, sir.
No.
Are we going on to item F then, George, I guess?
Yes, sir.
All right.
George
Brings us-
Bomar again. Report on activities accomplished during 2017.
George, if I could have a second.
Yes.
Carla James, TDLR. George isn't going to toot his own horn, so I'm going to. George has published yet another book, Weather in Texas, and I have to say, as a Longhorn, I'm mighty proud that we have recognized an Aggie in our Life membership magazine. His book was featured as one of the good reads in the last edition of the Alcalde. And so we're really proud to have George with us at TDLR and have such a great weather mind. So I wanted to give him some props that I knew he wouldn't.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Way to go, George. Get 'em.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And
Thank you.
got your first edition, so I'm going to get the new one and get you to sign it.
Thanks for bringing that up, Carla.
2017 was a down year for many of our projects, and we have several here today from those projects that would like to give you an overview of last season, this being the first meeting of the new year. Don't believe the annual analysis that's done at Texas Tech is available yet for all of our projects, but we do expect to have some numbers on those projects before we meet again a little later in the year. Jonathan, if you would, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jonathan Jennings, meteorologist with the West Texas Weather Modification Association. 2017, as George said, was kind of a down year. The West Texas project only had 25 operational days. That's well below our normal of about 40 to 45. So we just didn't have the opportunity to get out there and do a lot of cloud seeding. Early in the spring, there were plenty of cold fronts coming through and storms and showers and activity, but all took place overnight. And of course, we don't do any weather modification activities during the overnight hours. So overall, we only flew 100 flight hours. We're usually around 150. We fired about 966 flares. Usually we're around 1,200 to 1,300. And we're only at around 50 hygroscopic flares. Usually we're around 100 to 150. But a lot of those we fire in the springtime when we have clouds that are less efficient due to the dust issues that we have out in West Texas. So overall, it was a down year. I also do the operations for the Trans-Pecos program, and we hired a really good pilot out of Arizona. He did some great flying for us to start the year off. Had some aircraft issues. We were down for about 3 weeks, and then things really slowed down. So we missed a lot of opportunity during that three-week downtime. But overall, 10 operational days out there. We're usually around 15, but we've fired more flares than we ever had out there, just under 300 flares. We're usually around 200 to 250. So we were very efficient, I think, with the time we had during the operations. Dan's going to talk about the USDA TWMA research here in a little bit, but I was heavily involved with that. And as George said, we haven't gotten the Titan evaluation back from Dr. Ruiz. Of course, we're dealing with aging infrastructure just like everyone else, and it sounds like his computer wasn't compatible with some of the new data we have since we upgraded our machines a couple years ago. But something I wanted to talk about is leaning towards the evaluation that Dr. Ruiz does. There's some debate as to how accurate that evaluation can be at times due to evaporation issues and also due to the merging of cells in Titan. You have a storm to the north, storm to the south. They merge together, lumped together as one single cell. Very hard to evaluate stuff like that. Also storms that split. But Dr. Ruiz does a fantastic job in handling and all that. So a couple years ago, when I had an intern, we did a extensive rain gauge study to look at the rain gauges in West Texas, the target area, and compare them to areas out of the rain gauge or the target area. So I went ahead and updated all that information and added some new rain gauges into the network that I have. And the data's, it tells a great story. So within the WTWMA target area, our percent of normal rainfall since 2004 is about 104%. Outside the target area is about 96%, so that's an 8% difference. So we're seeing 8% better rainfall within the target area versus outside. The analysis from Dr. Ruiz for the West Texas area out in San Angelo suggests a 15% increase. So I started thinking, well, why is it so different? And then I realized there's a lot of rain gauges on the east and north side of our target area, outside of the target area, that are getting impacted by our seeded storms. So I went ahead and compared the rain gauges within the target area to just the west and northwest of the target area, and the difference was 15%, right on par with what Dr. Ruiz was saying. So I did all this math and statistics and figured out how much rainfall was the difference, and the difference is 2.10 inches. Dr. Ruiz's analysis is 2.09. So the rain gauge study, as a confirmatory analysis, is right on par with what Dr. Ruiz is saying. So I'm going to go ahead and investigate further. I have some data for the South Texas program. We're going to do a similar study for them down there. And we're going to present a poster at the WMA conference in April in Estes Park. Hopefully get some feedback from some of the other weather mod folks, how we could make this study more in depth and possibly publish something like this in the Journal of Weather Modification. So we're very happy with the results. And if you look at the 5-year moving averages, it's obvious around 2001, 2002, we started really figuring out what we were doing. And the differences inside versus outside the target area, it's there. But even further interesting is back in the late 80s, during some of the research that was going on between San Angelo and Big Spring, there was a little signal in there too. So we're making an impact for sure. And Dr. Ruiz's analysis seems to be spot on with what we're seeing at the surface. So it was good to see all that data and kind of give everybody an idea that Dr. Ruiz's analysis on Titan is the real deal. So we're very happy to see that. George mentioned the AMS conference that was here in Austin. Kendall and I, as well as Dan, had the pleasure of attending that. I was walking around talking to some folks that I know and came across this individual from North Carolina, and we started chatting about weather modification. Here he is in charge of this massive weather podcast and got really fascinated by some of the stories I was telling him with weather mod. So I just recorded a podcast with them. It's going to come out in March sometime during National Weather Podcast Month. And I was already able to listen to it, and it's going to be really good. I think it's going to inform a lot of people about weather mod. Young people just don't know much about weather modification. If we want to, continue to bring young people into this field, I think this is a good way. The kids listen to these podcasts, so I think this is going to be very beneficial for our long term getting involved with these podcasts and letting people know we're out here, it's real, it works, and that we're not chemtrails. Moving on, the legislative session. Obviously, we're in the interim right now, but Joe Morris and I are still busy speaking with some folks. We're going to go at a little bit of a different angle this year. We figure a lot of the legislatures or their staff members, when we leave their office, they're probably picking up the phone and calling the Texas Water Development Board to figure out more about us. And if you go to their website, there's nothing about weather modification on their website. If you talk to their board members, they had no clue we were out here. They've heard of it, but they had no information. So Joe Morris and I met with Peter Lake, one of the board members, and Kathleen Jackson, informed them, gave them as much information as they wanted and can handle. We're trying to build a relationship over there with Texas Water Development Board, so when we're over in the Capitol and someone's not too sure about us, they go ahead and call the Water Development Board. They have the resources available to let the folks know that we're not just out there doing stuff. We have scientific background, we have research backing us up, the evaluation, the TDLR supporting us. So it was certainly good to get in there with the Water Development Board, and we hope to continue that relationship down the road and maybe give us some more, make us a little bit more credible to the folks in the Capitol. I'm open to any questions.
Family, Mr. Jennings?
Jonathan, can you give us a heads up when the podcast is going to happen? Maybe George could shoot us an email so we make sure we see it.
I will do that, yes.
Appreciate that. That'd be cool.
Excellent information. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Kendall, would you like?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kendall LaRoche. I am the project meteorologist for the South Texas Weather Modification Association, and our researcher at Texas Tech was able to complete our evaluation for the 2017 season, so I'd just like to give a brief summary of our results. So the 2017 cloud seeding operational season was the 20th consecutive season of weather modification operations in the South Texas region. The main objective across South Texas has always been precipitation enhancement. The operational area did not change and included Bandera, Uvalde, Medina, Bear, Wilson, Frio, Atascosa, Karnes, McMullen, and B counties. The season began on April 11th and ended on October 3rd. There were 41 operational days with 198 hours of flight time. Both glaciogenic and hygroscopic flares were used for optimal effect throughout the entire season, with a total of 2,279 glaciogenic and 169 hygroscopic flares burned during the season. Each operational day was evaluated to see how well operations were performed, with excellent being the highest rating. For 2017, there were 29 excellent operational days, 8 very good days, and 4 good days. I would like to note that there was no seeding conducted August 24th through 28th because of Hurricane Harvey, and the rainfall data across the operational area from the 24th through the 28th was removed from the analysis. If this rainfall data had been kept in the analysis would have been heavily skewed. So the annual evaluation conducted by Texas Tech, Archie from Texas Tech University, reported a total of 250 seeded clouds, with 203 small seeded clouds, 29 large clouds, and 18 type B clouds. Small clouds are clouds with precipitation mass less than 10,000 kilotons, and large clouds are clouds with a precipitation mass greater than 10,000 kilotons. And type B clouds are clouds which were seeded, which were already 1 hour old or older. Two common variables examined during this analysis were precipitation flux, which is the amount of rain falling from a cloud, and precipitation mass, which is how much rain a cloud holds. Small seeded clouds had a precipitation flux increase of 39% and a precipitation mass increase of 120% compared to similar unseeded clouds. Large clouds had a precipitation flux increase of 22% and a precipitation mass increase of 57%, while seeded type B clouds had a precipitation flux increase of 7% and a precipitation mass increase of 15%. It was also noted that seeded clouds generally lasted longer and had larger areas and volumes as opposed to clouds which were not seeded. When examining the estimated water generated from cloud seeding, small seeded clouds provided an additional 198,000 acre-feet of additional water. Large clouds provided an additional 567,000 acre-feet of water, and type B clouds provided an additional 91,000 acre-feet of water, respectively. Over the entire South Texas operational region, cloud seeding activities brought an average 1.5 inches of additional precipitation, or an additional 855,000 acre-feet of water. This is an average 10.3% increase in precipitation over the seasonal value. Overall, the 2017 season was rated as excellent across the South Texas Weather Modification Association. Cloud seeding activities helped bring an average increase of 10% above the annual rainfall, with over 850,000 additional acre-feet of water. And additional activities that we were able to complete last year, besides, in addition to our operations, we were also, or myself, John, and our researcher Archie were able to publish a paper on the 2016 results within the Journal of Weather Modification. So that paper included the 2016 results in addition to an analysis of our use of both glaciogenic and hygroscopic flares, and how much better the dual seeding works than just using one type of flare. With that, that concludes my talk. Does anyone have any questions?
Your 41 days, was that quite a bit less than normal, or was that pretty close to the same?
That's very close to normal. Yeah. So, yeah, 41 operational days is very close to the number of operational days. However, the total clouds of 250, that is well above average. So it was actually busy across the South Texas region last year. We had we used more flares and we seeded more storms, but we had more opportunities, but they didn't all come it were kind of spread out. So we'd have a intense couple of weeks of cloud seeding and then a few weeks of nothing, just dry weather, and then it would alternate back and forth.
All right, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Thanks so much, Kendall.
My name is Craig Funky, and I'm the manager of the West Texas Weather Modification Program and the South Texas Weather Modification Program. And the report you just heard is really significant. And like George, Kendall will not toot his own horn. But in the 20 years that the South Texas program has been working, 2017 was the best year as far as results that we've had. And I give the full credit to the aggressiveness of Kendall. He has been an outstanding meteorologist, and we are very lucky to have a guy like Kendall working for us. So he has done an amazing job, especially last year. One thing on the numbers, when you see a 10% increase, keep in mind that isn't seeded cloud versus control cloud increase. The increases between the seeded cloud and the control cloud are much more than 10%. What Dr. Ruiz does is he takes the total amount of water produced and divides that by the total area of the target area. And with that, he comes up with a layer over the entire target area that has been increased. So areas that didn't receive any rain, which does happen, in the grand map of it, it shows that it did, and so the increases actually look a little smaller than what they are cloud to cloud. So where you might have a 50 to 100% increase with a seeded cloud versus an unseeded cloud, when he takes that number of acre feet and spreads it out over the entire target area, the sometimes 6 million acres, it looks like a 10% increase. And keep in mind, that is complete area-wide. So I just want to give Kendall a big thumbs up on the job he's doing, and do it again this year.
Thank you very much, Craig. George?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, George Bomar again. When I said earlier it's been a down year, obviously the South Texas area is the exception. But I can say for the Panhandle and the area west of the Pecos, along with the Edwards Plateau, that the number of operational days and number of opportunities to do seeding were subpar last year, and hopefully this year will be different.
Good deal. That brings us to item G, presentation on the USDA Water Development Board experiments. That's efficacy seeding with charged particles.
Mr. Chairman, George Bomar again. We granted exempt status to the USDA and the Texas Weather Modification Association's proposal to conduct some weather modification research during the summer of 2017. That research is continuing. There has been a recent request for the exempt status to be maintained for 2018. Dr. Dan Martin from the U.S. Department of Agriculture in College Station came to present what has been learned so far and what their plans are for this new year. Dan?
Martin?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, distinguished committee members. I'm Dr. Dan Martin with USDA Agricultural Research Service in College Station, Texas. I'm a research agricultural engineer and have been working with the West Texas Weather Modification Group since last June on this rain enhancement project that we have going with them. We had a very successful run last year. We were able to get in 4 flights, actually 5 flights. We had one more flight in September that we were able to finish up for a total of 16 clouds that we were able to seed. From those results, Dr. Ruiz did the analysis for us, and the results were very good. And most of the parameters that he analyzed, we had a doubling or tripling effect over the dual-seeded clouds. So it's shown a lot of promise, so much promise, in fact, that I have applied for a patent through USDA for the process. So I can't speak in detail as to what we're doing right now and detailed how we're doing it, but just know that it's working really well. Again, our sample size right now is 16 clouds, and so our goal this year is actually to go ahead and at least double that. We'd like to get up to 45 or 50 clouds in that data set so that we can have confidence that this technology is working as it should and it's repeatable. We're looking at all types of different scenarios, large clouds, big clouds, low inflow, high inflow, different types of parameters that go into that. So we're just trying to understand how well it works under lots of different conditions. But the results look really good. In addition to that, we would like to conduct some research later after the convective cloud seeding operation is over into stratiform clouds to see if we can have an effect on those and provide some much-needed rainfall during the winter months. So that is our goal. In addition, operationally, it would be nice to have a pilot year-round and to be able to generate additional rain during that time. So that is our goal, and that's where we're headed. I'm working with Mr. Jennings and Dr. Ruiz right now on a publication based on the work that we did last summer, and we hope to publish that in a well-respected journal such as Nature or Science this year. So we're we're getting very, very close to being able to submit that to the journal, and hope to be able to offer those results and the technique actually as soon as all the patent process is through.
Andy,
You said
questions?
you
Go ahead.
try some, on the stratoform clouds?
Yes, sir.
What height is that? Aren't they-
It varies. But Jonathan's better to explain this, but typically, it seems like it's between about 6,000 and 10,000 feet is where, sometimes they're lower, and so we might be 5,000 or 6,000 feet. Sometimes it may be as much as 10,000, but it's very doable, I do believe.
Clouds were real
I think you're thinking of Cirrus clouds.
high. Okay.
Cirrus clouds are 30, 40,000 feet.
Yes,
The
yes.
stratiform cloud, you know, you have those gray, gloomy days in West Texas and looks like it wants to rain, but maybe you get a drizzle. What we're hoping to do is get above that and seed the clouds from above and pull some of that moisture out and at least get a little bit of additional precipitation out of those clouds.
If you could introduce yourself, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm Jonathan Jennings, West Texas Weather Modification Association.
Yeah, you're right. That was,
So, yeah.
yeah.
Going back to the convective clouds, the one interesting thing that we've learned since 2012, each small seeded cloud with dual seeding, glaciogenic and hygroscopic, produced roughly 700 acre-feet per cloud. What we're seeing with the electrostatic seeding is about 1,400 acre-feet per cloud.
Wow.
That's a significant amount of water compared to what we're doing with dual seeding. So obviously, we need a lot more clouds to make sure we don't have something skewing the data there. But everything we ended up seeding last year pretty much exploded on us.
Embedded clouds, will you be able to?
Well, we need the inflow. So if it's embedded, we're not going to have much inflow.
Okay.
But if we get to the clouds and there's a little bit inflow, it's going to pay off, it looks like.
So are you limited in the areas that you're working? So for example, I couldn't encourage you to move into the panhandle a little bit higher?
No, actually, my understanding from what I understand of our authorization to do the research in Texas is that it includes the whole state of Texas. So we could actually do some work there in the Panhandle. That's
Just
correct.
given our rainfall numbers this year. It's a
I
little
understand y'all are in
scary.
severe drought in
Yeah.
areas up there. That's correct. Yeah,
It's very exciting.
very good.
Yes.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. That brings us up to item number H, consideration of possible recommendations on the amount of liability insurance required of a holder of a weather modification. Beaumar.
Mr. Chairman, George Bomar again. The next two items, H and I, are the result of feedback we received from an audit made of the weather modification program in the summer of 2017. The auditor asked that we furnish some documentation which would show why we have a threshold of $1 million in liability insurance that is applied for each applicant for a weather modification permit in the state of Texas. We're not really sure when that $1 million liability insurance level was established. The Weather Modification Act was passed in 1967. The Texas Water Development Board administered the program for the first 15 or so years. We don't have a paper trail that goes back near that far. And so we wanted to bring the matter before the committee today. Perhaps you might have a recommendation that that liability insurance threshold be changed or that it remain the same. But we would like to be able to show in the future that the matter was discussed and some determination was made that it is sufficient for applicants for permits to do weather modification in Texas. I furnished you a copy of a typical certificate of coverage from TML. This is from the South Texas Weather Modification Program when they renewed their permit. This is the documentation that we required that they provide. It does show a $1 million limit on the amount of liability insurance. We have other instances where applicants for permits showed they held more coverage than $1 million. But according to our rules, let me read the rule. It's 79.186. An application for a permit filed with the department must include the following, and one of the pieces that must be furnished is sufficient information to satisfy the department that the applicant is able to pay damages for liability which might reasonably arise as a result of the proposed operation, such as a copy of a comprehensive liability insurance policy or a certificate from an insurer guaranteeing coverage for the proposed operation during the proposed term. Suffice it to say, we've not had an instance when liability insurance had to be tapped in order to defend a permit holder from a suit in court. And the $1 million liability insurance threshold has been in place for, I want to say, at least 30 years, and very likely even longer than that.
I know we're unique here in Texas and kind of ahead of all the other states, but do you have any information from any other regulatory program across the country that, whether they have any higher requirements or anything like that?
I have discussed with some colleagues in other states what requirements they have, and they're similar to what we currently have in Texas. Either 1 million or 2 million is a standard amount of liability insurance coverage.
Is there a trail of any action against any of those other states?
No, sir, there's not been a suit filed since the Rapid City flood in South Dakota in 1971.
What prompted the audit?
Yes.
Carla James, TDLR. Excuse me, yes, sir. The state agencies are required to go through an internal audit on a yearly basis, and this was just one of the programs that they chose to look at.
Okay.
Out of our programs. Nothing prompted it other than just standard operating procedure.
Okay, thank you.
And George, not to put you on the spot too much, but do you have a recommendation? Do you think $1 million's enough? I think we should look at increasing that a little bit.
If I may, could I ask someone here representing a permit holder
Absolutely.
their degree of satisfaction or otherwise with a $1 million insurance coverage?
Welcome any of y'all to Craig.
Someone want to?
Craig Funky again, and I do manage both the West Texas and the South Texas programs. And the only thing I can say is, like George said, we have never had to use that insurance. I don't know. I would like to have some time to work with George on this and maybe some the insurance industry and take a look at our liability and our risk involved. And I don't just want to throw out a number based on just my opinion. There has got to be a industry formulation or algorithm to figure this out and just maybe assess our risk and see what kind of insurance we should be carrying. From a budget standpoint, budgets are extremely tight. If we go up, that's money that comes out of operations. So it's going to be a real balancing act, but I would like to maybe have something to bring to y'all at the next meeting.
Very good idea. Thank you. Jonathan, do you have any input or anything different? Very good. May I make a suggestion? I don't, we need a motion on this or not, but that we just continue this item till our next meeting
Okay.
and then kind of come back, and if there's any changes, then we can kind of discuss those in as recommendations back to the commission. Okay?
Item I also is from input we received from the auditor a few months back. The auditor noted that we require of our weather modification permit holders who do rain enhancement using aircraft and ground-based radar a monthly report, a rather detailed report that lists number of days, number of operations, flight time, the amount of seating pyrotechnics that are used. They're also required to maintain records that would allow us to determine on a particular day where the seating aircraft were located and when seating material was applied, but that we do not require monthly reporting on hail cannon activity. And the auditor wanted to know why we allow the hail cannon operator to report on a quarterly basis rather than a monthly basis. And I provided a couple of quarterly reports for you to look at from the lone hail cannon operator in Texas, Belding Farms in Fort Stockton. And as you can see from those reports, about the only time the hail cannon is used is during the spring storm season. Most of the quarterly reports indicate when the hail cannon network was activated or deactivated. There is one quarterly report where several instances in which the hail cannons were operated are noted with information on when the hail cannons were triggered and when they were turned off. The level of information on hail cannon usage, understandably, is quite different from what is provided by those who use aircraft to seed thunderstorms for rain enhancement and/or hail suppression. Our rule, I'm going to read that to you, 79.33 states, any person conducting a weather modification operation with an operational or target area that includes any part of a Texas county must report in writing the following information to the department according to the schedule given. And number 2 under that 79.33 reads, for each month in which operations are conducted, one copy of the record of operations for that month required by 79.31, and if applicable, one copy of the record of operations for that month required by 79.32 must be filed by the 15th day of the following month. This is another way of saying, in my view, when the law was passed in 1967 and when we adopted rules, took effect in 2001, this language had in mind conventional cloud seeding using aircraft and ground-based radar, where you have a lot of data that's gathered on a continuing basis. The fact that it states for each month in which operations are conducted, the auditor saw that applicable to hail cannon as well as aircraft-based operations. So I bring the matter to you today to invite you to discuss if you feel the quarterly reporting by a hail cannon operator is sufficient, or if we, to comply with the rule, should request a monthly report, or you might make the recommendation that we make a rule change. And we can do that. It's not in the statute that they report monthly, but it is in our rules that a permit holder report on a monthly basis.
My personal feeling is that quarterly is sufficient, specifically for the reasons you stated. They're stationary. They only operate generally 2 to 3 months out of the year. And they're not aerial, and they're not doing things on a daily basis or as often as these gentlemen would like to be doing them. They're just doing it as absolutely needed. So I'm good with just continuing with the quarterly thing, but I welcome all y'all's input as well.
Makes sense to me. If it's working, don't break it.
There's not enough activity to warrant a monthly report, in my opinion.
So there's a lot of extraneous paperwork involved if you have someone like a Hale Cannon operator reporting every single month of the year.
Would be, and it would take more staff time here that's, I think, better used doing something else. Unless increasing this to like maybe a weekly report would encourage them not to ask for a Hale permit, but I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
Mr. Chairman, this is Brad Bowman, General Counsel. If I could
Bowman.
interject here, just follow up on something that George mentioned. If the committee does go that direction that your discussion might be leading, if a quarterly report was more acceptable, then the staff could work on a rule change and bring that to you. There's a review process that needs to go through. We could bring that to you at a future meeting.
Yes, I think that would be good. Anybody have any objection to that?
Absolutely.
Great.
So, Mr. Chairman, Carla James, TDLR will add that to the agenda for the next meeting.
Very good, thank you. That now brings us to item number J, consideration of possible recommendation and application for renewal, the modification permit for West Texas, San Angelo. Oh,
Mr. Chairman, George Bomar again. This is an application for renewal of an existing permit for another 4-year period beginning in March from the West Texas Weather Modification Association, which is based in San Angelo. Jonathan Jennings, who has reported to you previously on that project's operations in 2017, has furnished a completed application along with an operations plan and a draft notice of intention, which is being published in newspapers that have a general circulation in the counties for which the permit is being requested. These counties are Howard, Mitchell, Koch, Runnels, Concho, Menard, Kimball, Edwards, Valverde, Terrell, Pecos, Crane, Midland, and Martin. And as you can see, it's quite a large operational area, within which there is a target area, or the area where the effect of seeding is intended, and those counties are Glasscock, Sterling, Reagan, Irion, Tom Green, Crockett, Sliker, and Sutton counties. And this permit would take effect when the current permit expires in the first week of March. The publication has already begun in 3 newspapers, Midland, San Angelo, and Del Rio. I anticipate that the third and last notice will be published soon, so that the window for public input will end in about 2 weeks. So far, we've not received any response from the public in the way of letters requesting a public meeting, petitions, complaints. Haven't even received any inquiries from the public about this proposed operation. And so the only thing remaining for the association to provide will be affidavits from those newspapers that corroborate the fact that the notice did appear at least once a week for 3 straight weeks in those newspapers that have a general circulation in both the operational and target areas. And I anticipate on having those affidavits before this current permit expires. And so a recommendation from the committee today on acting on that permit application would be appropriate.
Any questions for Mr. Bowman on this one?
I move we make the appropriate recommendation.
To recommend approval
Yes.
of the
Recommend approval.
permit renewal? Got a second? All right, we have a motion and a second to recommend renewal of the permit. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it, motion unanimously carries. That brings us then to item K for the application for a new permit from the Trans-Pecos Weather Modification Association.
Mr. Chairman, George Bomar. Currently, the Trans-Pecos Weather Modification Association holds 2 permits for areas west of the Pecos. One permit will expire in about 6 weeks. The other will expire a few months later. The association is requesting a new permit, and they intend to consolidate the 2 permits into one. This new permit, if issued, would include the original 5-county area along the New Mexico border, but would also add a number of counties to the west and south. We have an application from the association. We have an operations plan that describes the type of weather modification activity, equipment and personnel, climate and hazardous weather methodology and evaluation, standard material that appears in operations plans, and a draft notice of intention which has begun to be published in a number of newspapers in counties along and west of the Pecos River. The first notice appeared on January the 11th, which means the window of opportunity for people to respond will be closing in about 9 days. I do have a number of letters that we have received from folks who either live in or own property in Hudspeth County, which is at the west end of the proposed operational area. And these letters essentially read the same as co-owners of there's a property identified in Hudspeth County. Our opposition is due to the fact we irrigate through an irrigation district, and any rainfall is detrimental to our farming operation. And there are 6 people who have signed that letter addressed to the executive director. There is another letter, a demand for a public meeting from someone living in Hudspeth County. I am opposed to the moisture seeding that will adversely negatively affect our native pasture rainfall insurance. Someone who says the same thing living in Hudspeth County. In all, we have approximately we have 13 who have written so far to request a public meeting or to express the sentiment that they do not want the permit to be issued.
Is that in the target area?
Previously, I understand that Hudspeth County has not been in the target area. The notice of intention that is appearing in the newspapers does list Hudspeth County as a county in the target area, and so folks living there obviously have a right to respond and request that we hold a public meeting. I would remind that we require a minimum of 25 who either own property or who live in the area, operational or target, in order for us to schedule and conduct a public meeting. And as I said, there are about 10 days remaining for other input to be received. We'll wait and see how many additional comments we get.
Did the letter mention what type of farming?
Are they in Dell City, probably? I'm guessing for the farmers.
The folks that signed this one letter, there are 6 signatures, are co-owners of the Carbial farm located in Hudspeth County.
It doesn't say what crop they're growing that they're consuming.
No, it does not. It says we irrigate through an irrigation district. No identification of any crops. There is one letter that says, "We are opposed to rainmaking as we have a problem with erosions and flooding and request no rain." And these folks have a Fabens, Texas address, which is in El Paso County, which is even further west. So we'll need to make a determination. I just received these this morning. We'll need to make a determination that any or all of these folks do own property or do live in the area that has been advertised as either operational or a target area. And as I said, we'll wait for a while longer before we total up the number of people who have responded to the notice.
Jennings had a comment. Come on up. Announce yourself again.
Jonathan Jennings, West Texas Weather Mod Association. I've been working with the Trans-Pecos folks for 5 years now, and I can tell you that we never fly in Hudspeth County. We go as far west as Culberson County. The Guadalupe Mountains kind of dissect Culberson into two. We rarely go into Culberson any more than 10 miles because of the mountains. We don't want to go out there. Additionally, per the operations plan, we would not be able to safely operate out in Hudspeth County. We wouldn't have radio communications, we wouldn't have radar coverage, and we wouldn't have telemetry. So I, under, what I think is Hudspeth County probably shouldn't even be in the target or operations plan at all, because we don't even get close to that county. I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions, anybody?
Leave that county off.
I know, I don't understand why it's in the, why
Maybe
it's
y'all can make
included.
a minor permit amendment to, like, you'll work that out with staff, but, okay. Any other questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Wait a minute, why don't we remove Hudspeth County from the doggone permit application?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we would need for the applicant to resubmit a permit request and delete a county or counties. Although we've begun the process and we do have public input, which may necessitate that we hold a public meeting. And I can tell you, we've had experiences in the past where we've had folks come to a public meeting from a particular area, and as a result of that input, the agency chose to issue a permit, but in the permit designated a smaller area leaving off the county where the resistance or the opposition was located. And I can see that as a possibility in this instance. If we get enough requests for a public meeting, we would go ahead and hold a public meeting and fully identify the nature of the opposition and then make a decision about issuing a permit. I foresee us coming back to the committee once we've held a public meeting to let you know what transpired during that meeting and to perhaps offer a recommendation to you or have you give us a recommendation based upon the input from the public meeting.
Is it possible to approve the permit pending the outcome of that meeting? I mean, is there a way for us to approve it, but also give opportunity for it to be altered? If we approve the permit today,
If we can approve the permit
I suppose
upon
we can.
the outcome of, if there is a
of the
public
public
meeting.
meeting or the
If there's
removal
not a
of the
public
county.
meeting, because we've done that kind of before, I think.
Almost like a conditional recommendation of
Yes.
approval.
That's what I'm
This is
looking
Brad Bowman, General Counsel. I think you could do that. That would be your recommendation to the staff as to how to handle that permit application.
Recommendation of approval subject to results of the public meeting and further staff recommendations.
I'd make a recommendation to approve the permit conditional that it is, if there is a public meeting, you gotta have 25, didn't you say?
At least 25.
At least 25, so you don't know if you're gonna have it or not. But if there is a public meeting, then on the outcome of that, if there's anything different, then we have to come back here.
Seems to me there was going to be a public meeting, and Jonathan tells the public what he just told us, and that ought to put it to rest.
I will, but
Mr. Chairman, George Bomar again. The committee could make a recommendation that the agency issue the permit based upon the merits of what is proposed, and then we would act on the permit application after we had a public meeting, assuming we have one. We may not have one, but assuming we do, based upon what transpires during that meeting, having your recommendation that the permit be issued would be sufficient for us.
I'm good with that.
So,
Good.
did you get all that? Okay, then I make the motion to recommend what he said.
Conditional approval.
It was
correct?
stated very well.
Well, I think what they're telling us is if there's some changes that come about as a result of the public meeting, if one is held, they'll bring it back to us.
Yes.
Otherwise, so we don't really need to do anything conditionally, we just go ahead and make a motion to approve it on its merits now. And then if there's a change, they'll bring it back to us. Sound okay? So you make a motion?
I'd make a motion to recommend the approval for the permit.
Very good. Got a second? Got a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Thank you. That concludes our regular business, correct? So that brings us
Sir.
now to item number L, recommendations for agenda items for the next committee meeting. We have two things we identified here that staff is going to work on for us today, that we discussed today, rather. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, George Bomar, I anticipate we'll have another permit renewal request from the Seeding Operations and Atmospheric Research Program that has had a project in the Abilene-Wichita Falls area for the last several years. Their permit is due to expire around the 15th of June. So it would seem, don't mean to jump the gun here, but
No,
it
sorry.
would seem that a
We'll
meeting
put up the next one, sure.
leading
Item L.
up to that date would be timely.
Is it suggesting early June
Yes.
or late May, or?
Around the first week of June, is that right?
Yes, if we had a meeting about that time, I anticipate we could also include license renewals for fiscal year 19.
First week of June, the 7th is our first Thursday, if Thursdays still work well for everybody. Anything from the department, is that, the 7th look okay for you
Yes,
all?
Mr. Chairman, Carla James, TDLR. The 7th looks fine for us. 10 o'clock start again? Is that appropriate?
Works well here. Okay.
So June 7th at 10 a.m.
That's our tentative next meeting date, subject to staff needing to move anything for various reasons, but do that by unanimous consent if there's no objection.
7th of June. Got it.
All right. In which case, we have concluded our business for the day. We miss George Ferry very much, so we will adjourn in his memory. And
Absolutely.
see everybody back in June.
Gavel out, please, sir.
And it is 11:15 for the record.